And we're off to the races.
Hello.
How do?
What? I don't know why that got me, but that's something I would say. Oh, God.
So
I put my coffee too far
that
away.
actually comes from, and this is going to be really random, but when I used to be in a band, with a guy that was also from Rockhampton, and he told me a story once about how his partner in Rockhampton back in the day worked in sales, in car sales, with a guy who used to answer the phone like this. How do? And he just always remembers that. And so we would just walk around going like, how do? And so it's just come down to how do. And then you say, what do?
What do?
What do?
Yeah, I do say what do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Some of those things you don't even pick up that you do.
What do?
What do I do? Everyone's already stopped listening.
Yeah, totally. Well,
we can say whatever we want now.
Welcome to the PitchShift podcast. Again.
Oh, yeah, we don't really introduce the actual podcast when we start, do we? Welcome to the PitchShift podcast.
Profesh. I figured today we would chat about it's kind of related to the lanes thing, I think.
Yeah.
In that I kind of want to chat about heavy music because it is one of our very neurospicy
special
interest topics. And
very special.
So I think, and it's about what it means to pop culture because there are definitely moments over the years that heavy music has broken through. And I think that there are lanes that have popped up in heavy music, but only because other bands walked before those could run.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be people that might not have listened to the other episodes, but like the overarching idea of this podcast is like if you only listen to old music and you like stuck in your ways of only listening to old music and not discovering new things, you know, it's difficult to do so because you don't know where to start. And the lanes conversation that we've had before, just briefly, is if there is someone that is very high up in their field, in their particular genre, so pop stars are a good example. So like Pink is in the lane of like the sort of circusy rock star pop chick at the moment, but then, you know, someone else might come along and do that when she retires or like she's, you know, doing less of that stuff. And it's the same thing with music. You know, the top of like the metalcore ladder at one point were bands like All That Remains or Trivium and those kind of bands, but now metalcore is sort of changing everything. And so you've got your Architects and you've got your...
Exactly, yeah. And so those bands have kind of taken over the lanes of those older bands. They're different kind of music and everything. Like that, they've changed things, but generally...
They occupy that space in the zeitgeist, in the minds of pop culture.
100%, yeah. And there's like, you know, for every genre, there's that one like household name band. And... Yeah,
that. The artist that your mum would think of.
Exactly.
When you think of that type of music.
Yeah. And so you were saying about Linkin Park.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about, you know, I was tracing back this idea of heavy music in the mainstream and hitting mainstream moments that ordinarily wouldn't be open to heavy music. So recently, I'm talking maybe in the last 4 or 5 months, Knocked Loose and Poppy did a set on Jimmy Kimmel Live.
I think that was only like a month ago now.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Christmas makes everything feel like it's
elongated for sure. And I mean, sure, it copped a lot of people being like, thanks, my kid is scared, you know, kind of feedback.
There was one comment that I couldn't tell if it was a troll or not, but it was a chick saying that, you know, like, oh, I was watching this with my son and he always really enjoys, you know, the bands on Jimmy Kimmel and he loves, you know, guitar music and everything. And then after the first...
You heard the junt.
Yeah, after the fourth junt, he was, you know, crying in his seat and we had to turn it off. And I can't believe you'd air something like this. And it kind of felt like it might have been a troll. I hope it was. But yeah, like Jimmy Kimmel has been known for putting on, I mean, Slipknot's played, Mastodon's played, heavier acts, but Knock Loose is...
That feels like a pop culture breakthrough moment to me.
And it was one of those things that, and even I put it to you that even a Slipknot on Jimmy Kimmel, they were already big and popular by the time they played on Jimmy Kimmel.
Yes.
And, maybe, and I know Knock Loose is albums and albums in, but that, that is throwdown hardcore music. That is very, very aggressive.
It's also still like Knock Loose has been around for a while now, but it's still very like young metal in the sense that Slipknot getting on Jimmy Kimmel kind of makes sense because like even though not everyone's a metalhead that watches late night shows, it's squarely in the demographic like of age that's watching, like the age group.
I also feel like they had already broken through by the time that they played there. It was like they had kind of earned the spot.
Household name
already. Stuff like Metallica playing on there, that's just like, duh.
Yeah.
I caught in my TikTok feed today, even in 1991, I'm guessing they were on the Black Album tour promo. I caught, it was someone had ripped a VHS tape of Metallica talking on like a midday talk show in Australia to promo the Black Album and the Black Album tour. So I was like, wow, like that is,
but the difference is,
that they're not even playing shows. It had Lars and Jason Newsted doing it like talk show, not even a variety show, like chat show.
Yeah.
Midday kind of talk show back then.
But they could though, because the Black Album, at least, if it hadn't come out yet, people wouldn't think that because like And Justice for All was the last thing they put out. But as soon as you hear any of like the songs off of the Black Album, there was a lot of good radio shit on there, right? Like it was there's a reason it sold an unimaginable amount of copies.
To this day, sells 1 million copies a year, yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. But it makes sense because they had stuff on there that appealed to people that were going to listen to the radio and weren't Metallica fans. Knock Loose is like... There's been no...
And Poppy as well, yeah.
And Poppy, not really any like breakthrough mainstream radio friendly shit from them. That's like when I was literally like scrolling through my Instagram stories, just going through them, and I saw someone posted like the full song on Instagram, and with the story you only get like the first 15 seconds.
Yes.
And I was somewhere where I couldn't listen, and I'm just watching. The person who posted it, one of my mates that's into a lot of heavy stuff, he's posted this Jimmy Kimmel thing. And so I'm like, I'm kind of curious. Why would he repost a Jimmy Kimmel thing? Oh, they're outdoors. I was probably one of the gigs. I wonder who they've got. And I was just thinking like, wouldn't it be funny if it was someone like really crazy heavy and I just see Jimmy Kimmel's like mouth make the shape for Knock Loose. And I didn't even, that it wasn't subtitled. I just saw him go like that with his mouth. And I'm like, holy shit, click, immediate click, headphones, I'm going outside. I have to.
Yeah. And so what my point is, to get to that point, I feel like there's a couple of things that have happened to happen in culture.
Yeah.
For it to get to there.
Well, working back
and
from
I think
there,
Linkin Park, something like Linkin Park.
Yeah.
Back in the day, the commercial.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, again.
Success of something like Linkin Park. And, even before it, Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff.
There was, even for their era though, those bands had radio friendliness in that they had like, was it In the End has no screaming in it, I don't think.
Yeah,
so it
correct.
was like their big like sing-along sort of thing.
It's got some vocal fry on a couple of lines, but I wouldn't say there's screaming in at all in the end.
So working backwards from there with like Jimmy Kimmel and him putting on bands like Slipknot and Mastodon and stuff, that's something that's really huge, I think, is that like all these bands have paved the way for this band, but also Jimmy Kimmel being someone that has sort of championed these bands, whether or not, I don't know if he's actually into heavy stuff or whether he's got someone that is booking the bands and he's just like, hey, you can have you book whatever you want, I don't care. But I think that's really cool because the jump between those bands to get to Knock Loose, that's a really big swing to take.
Totally.
And only Jimmy Kimmel's show could do that.
I also think, let me just state for the record as well, I don't think that Knock Loose haven't earned this.
No, that's not.
They definitely like they're at a cultural moment right now where they're, it's cracking through, and it should have been there, absolutely. But it's one of those things I don't think it ordinarily would have been there. Like that's a swing, like you say.
They deserve that many eyes on them, whether or not anyone expected that demographic of eyes to be on them is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
I don't think Knock Loose or their management or anybody involved in any of that had Knock Loose on the late night show with Jimmy Kimmel on their bingo card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone went, what would be wrong if we, like, what could go wrong if we did this? Not enough to say no to it.
I'm also, so let me go back to my working, is I think new metal stuff like Linkin Park, your Evanescence, even stuff like Stained, and things like that, Korn, stuff that broke through to the mainstream without ever losing its sort of like heaviness. It paved the way for bands that even that came before it. So the grunge era and that sort of alternative metal era never hit, even though that you look back, that paved the way for that.
Yeah.
So Linkin Park, I think, is the seed that eventually gets to stuff like Knock Loose on late night. So Linkin Park played on late night shows plenty, but I don't think it was ever as heavy as that. But it has to be the social lubricant that gets the conversation to something as heavy as that.
It's the gateway drug. You got to gateway people, and you've got to set the expectation. Occasionally, you're going to put something that's a little left of center on there, even though it's popular enough to be on there. It's something that like your core audience isn't expecting. But I remember I saw a band I love, Dillinger Escape Plan. I saw them on Conan O'Brien one night. They were playing one of their songs off like when they were in their 2008, 2009, they were in their Ironworks album cycle, and there's a song in there that had like falsetto. It was very sing-along. There was a little bit of screaming in it, but clearly someone just slipped that one under the radar, and Conan's a cool enough show to have it on. But they're getting up on the desk and jumping on his desk and, kicking stuff around. And I watched that, and I love that so much that it made me want to watch more late night shows and everything.
Do you feel like
the swing, I think, is you've got the demographic of, say, like the parents that are watching it, but then the younger kid that stays up one night and watches it with it and sees something that the parents don't really care for, but the kid lights up and goes like, and it's the see it to be it moment. So I think it's important to take those like outside your core audience swings for that reason, because then you get a whole new audience. Conan's audience through like the 90s and the 2000s were all of like the college kids that didn't want to watch, Letterman and all the other ones.
Yeah, because that was their dad's late night.
Yeah. So if you don't take those swings, your show dies because you don't forge a new younger audience by showing them you're willing to take risks.
There's probably another discussion to be had here around that. It's a bit of a theory that for the longest time in pop culture, metal and heavy music was the scary thing. It was the new scary alternative thing. So in the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, that was, if you're a metalhead, you were the scary, and then it became goth music and all of that sort of stuff. At a certain point in the 2000s, 2010s, heavy music went out of favor as the thing that the youth went to as the scary thing.
Yeah.
And it changed into like, love it or not, I don't, but like was that sort of trap, hip hop sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And, sort of, those sort of mumble rappers and that sort of stuff. And that was the, like, your parents disapprove kind of stuff. And I think it's been long enough now that maybe a knock loose on Jimmy Kimmel is that moment to swing it back to heavy music is the thing your parents disapprove of again.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a new generation of, and it may be a wrong thing to bring up now. It's maybe a little bit, not the example to use, but certainly when in the 90s, the phenomenon of a Marilyn Manson back then, that genuinely looking back now, looking at all of Marilyn Manson's music, not at all heavy.
Yeah.
It's rock at best.
Yeah.
And
there were a lot of bands that put on that persona and that style, like the makeup and they looked scarier. Exactly. The kind of band that looked scarier than they sound. Honestly, the idea that anyone was like thought that Kiss was like
satanic,
satanic fucking scary stuff is laughable.
Yeah.
I want to rock and roll. Oh no! It's like, who could listen to that
and just be like, they're the devil.
That's the devil. Yeah. I always love the idea.
This is virtually disco with a different coat of paint on it.
It does make me wonder if that's what they thought was satanic at the time. If you took Knocked Loose in a time machine back and got them to play back then, whether the people would think that was worse than Kiss, or whether they wouldn't even understand it enough to process it as that.
Yeah.
Because it would just sound like almost inhuman and mechanical to them, and they wouldn't even assign the idea that that's a person being demonic. Because like I'm sure if you went really far back in time before there was any sort of 500 years ago and showed someone a camera or whatever like that, they think you're a witch.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it is interesting through the generations, especially only decades apart, what was problematic and then 10 years later was standard everyday household shit.
So the point I was going to make was that happened in the 90s, and obviously I'm old enough to remember going through that, and I bought the Mechanical Animals album on cassette because it was only $5 at Sanity, and I was a lowly trolley pusher. So, I bought a handful of cassettes and still had a player back then. I think I bought the Fatboy Slim album. I bought Mechanical Animals and Follow the Leader on cassette.
Yeah.
And
that checks out.
Yeah. And I was playing Mechanical Animals at home, and Dad literally threw it out the window. He's like, I had this shit in my house. And it was like, that was the vibe at the time. So it was like, it has that opposite effect of everyone wants to listen to it now because it's the thing your parents don't want you to listen to. So it has this attraction to young people. So, and I think it totally went away. And I think maybe like the oversaturation and overproduction of new metal and metal in the early 2000s, it got to a point where it was like, okay, we're done with this.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was done to death. And I think people went away from it, and it stopped getting played on radio because all of a sudden it was butt rock.
Yeah.
It was no longer the edgy thing to play on radio.
Isn't that funny too, that like you can have like new metal is like the genre and it's cool and it's trendy and everything, and then as soon as people start to dislike it and get sick of it, they change it to butt rock. Because like those are technically, I would say they're two different genres, but basically anything that was like new metal that came too late to the party and started to be so polished to be called butt rock is such a big like get out of our house kind of energy. It's just like nobody wants you here anymore. Fuck you.
Yeah, totally. And some bands were lucky enough to be able to transition out of that into a different sound really quickly.
Machine Head, I think, was one of the bands that
they did a new metal album.
They went through the ringer because in the 90s they were doing
sort of industrial tinged metal.
Yeah, they were in that sort of like in the very start of it, they were half sort of thrash, half like Pantera kind of vibe. Like they had that real like
like heavy breakdowns and stuff and the really mechanical tone.
Yep.
But then they took a swing, a bit like Metallica kind of did as well in the 90s, took a swing at like, oh, new metal's getting big. Let's make a slightly more like, you know, new metal kind of rappy album, and that just tanked them. And then the next album after that, like a couple albums later, they brought out that was like really good was Through the Ashes of Empires, which came out like a month before 9/11.
Yeah. I read a story about
and
this.
And it just tanked that album, and that was a really good album. But like they took all these
it was a victim of timing
at trying to maintain or like get new audience and stuff, and they just kept messing things up. And so like there was a couple of albums there that probably would have been butt rock, would have been called that. And so it's hard to transition through it. They managed to get out the other side of it, but there's a lot of bands that would have just gone,
I put it to you if their earlier albums weren't as iconic.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you put an album out that's badly received and then you put a second one out that's badly received, like a lot of bands would just give up.
Oh. Yeah. Metallica surviving Saint Anger and Lulu.
Yeah.
Woo! That is you're invincible.
So the connecting thing between Linkin Park and Knock Loose, you were saying, would be I Prevail.
I feel like I Prevail sits right in this like sweet spot there of like it occupied the zone when Linkin Park post Chester, when Chester passed away, R.I.P., incredible performer and vocalist. I feel like I Prevail occupied the lane.
Yeah.
Which also contains what I think is only one stepping stone away from it's definitely more produced and produced differently then and is in a different genre. It's metalcore instead of hardcore like Knock Loose.
Yeah.
But its occupation of the space that it does in pop culture, I Prevail having the two vocalist thing, similar to one is a screamer, one is a melodic singer.
Yeah,
you've got that's one, one step closer to. So I apologize. So you've got Linkin Park, you've got singer rapper.
Yep,
and then you take one more. Move.
So then you've got singer and screamer.
Singer and screamer. Heavier, but has the DNA of Linkin Park sewn into it in terms of the dynamics are similar in that there's that. I feel like the fans all made the move over.
Yeah.
So many, and also towards the end of Chester's tenure.
Yep.
In Linkin Park, kind of tailed off into softer material, not as heavy. They, became the albums had one or two heavy songs on them, and the rest were very radio friendly. So I feel like what happened there is the heavy fans dropped off and were looking for a bigger hit, of heavy, and found something like I Prevail, and it ate up that spot that there was those people were looking for.
Absolutely. And like I went with you, we saw them with was it Wind Waker, and who was the other band that played that night?
Was it another US band or?
I think so.
Yeah.
Sorry, can't remember who that was.
No.
Must have been great. But yeah, we saw them, and I think their vocalist had done his voice, their singing vocalist. So he tried his best. He couldn't really sing at all that night, but I could still see, having not been a big listener to that band, I could definitely see the appeal because what they were doing, like stage presence wise and the whole production of it all and everything, it really felt like, they had stepped up into there. And then this Knock Loose song, Suffocate, I think part of the reason why it got clipped out, like they did a 5-song set, but it got clipped out and used as like the main song that they advertised out of it, was it had Poppy in it. And so Poppy, normally actually like does screaming and stuff and does weird music, but sings as well.
Yeah.
But ironically enough, they picked the song that has, well, like one of their heaviest songs that has someone on there that would normally sing that doesn't sing at all in it. But the reggaeton breakdown in it is like the thing that is, not super accessible or mainstream, but he's a really iconic thing of that album that they've brought out. And so like,
I love the blending of the genre thing, and I think that's sort of the
next step.
DNA,
It's even heavier, but then there's these really interesting genre blending breakdowns.
That rhythm is excellent.
Yeah,
and it's a time signature that has existed in heavy music previous, but not a feel and not that rhythm.
Yeah, they're actually, I tell a lie.
But it has in that trap. Like mumble rap as well, like that kind of those rhythms,
that
those
really
Latin
sort of
rhythms
syncopated feel
has existed in that as well. So all of these things, I feel like the DNA comes down the line.
Well, there was a band ages ago, and I remember this tweaking me at the time, thinking like, that's awesome. Would have been 2007 in Gladstone. I was at a PCYC show, and there was a Sydney band called Bermuda that was playing there that aren't a band anymore.
Yeah.
And they had a song called, I think it was called Batten Down the Hatches, and it had like a reggaeton breakdown in it.
Oh shit.
It was very similar to this. It's different to the Knock Loose one, but I remember hearing that and like the swing of that breakdown, and I didn't really like the rest of that stuff for that band, but I heard that and I listened to that song so much because it was so interesting to me to hear that. So Knock Loose, again, are doing that for this generation of like, hey, you don't have to just chug the same chugs all the time.
Yeah.
You could like not sacrifice the heaviness of the song, not actually do like a 12-foot ninja and completely change from genre to genre
within the same song.
With like hard cuts to like, disco and breakdowns and flamenco guitar and everything.
It is funny. Those are very hard cuts.
Yeah. It's super hard cuts. And it's great. But like this song really does justice to the idea of like, hey, we're still the same band. We're still doing this heavy stuff, but we've incorporated this genre in without it being a meme. Yeah, they did a really good job.
Yeah, totally.
And shout out to Brian from Knock Loose for taking a section of the song that doesn't have any vocals in it and putting a really fucking long pig squeal in it on national TV, on an international like late night show. Yeah. There are a ton of people out there that just had their pig squeal cherry popped.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's kind of part of what I'm at as well. What I'm at with this kind of theory as well is that we needed all of those pop culture heavy music moments in the past to get to that, to pig squeals on, I think we needed.
Linkin Park walked so that Knock Loose could run.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Anyway, I'd love people's feedback on that. I think like there's also probably, I will put it in there that there's probably a moment in between I Prevail to Knock Loose. There's a band or a moment somewhere in there that I'm probably missing a stepping stone to. But I'd love people's thoughts on
very broad strokes to say that, but yeah, there's obviously lots going on there.
Yeah. I'd love people's feedback or thoughts on this theory because it's like that's about as much as I thought about that. I think it's just a through line of a thought, and I feel like the theory works, but I'd love people's thoughts on it.
And there'd be tons of other examples of that around. I suppose that again is kind of the core concept of the podcast is like old band compared to new band and like the taking those through lines and being like, if you like this band, they were walked so that this other band could run.
Totally.
And that just played out in front of us very quickly. So I think that's kind of it for this one. This is all these episodes are supposed to be 30 minutes and they never are. So there's a 30-minute one for you. If you need more, go back and listen to one of the ones you haven't listened to. And we'll see you next time.